The metal mask hummed softly against Kira's skin, syncing with her pulse as she stood at the edge of the council chamber. Her breath was even, controlled, each inhale calibrated by the biocircuitry that lined her helmet. Behind the faint red glow of her eyes, emotion was suppressed, not absent. She was calm in the way a dormant volcano was calm, still only until provoked. Opposite her, seated around a polished obsidian table, were the envoys from the Galactic Accord. Their robes shimmered with synthetic silk and peace-sewn insignia, worlds away from the scorched leather and plated armor Kira wore. They called this planet a neutral zone, a testament to diplomacy. But she could smell the fear beneath the sterile lighting and air purifiers. "You understand," said Envoy Moran, a tall woman from the Garden Moon Pelth, "that for peace to truly take hold, we must engage without barriers. No masks, no weapons, no threats." Kira tilted her head slightly, her fingers brushing the edge of her mask in a subtle motion of consideration. "My mask is not a threat," she said, her voice modulated and even. "It is what prevents one." A murmur passed between the delegates, a ripple of unease and disagreement. They didn't understand. None of them ever truly did. General Arian, her second, shifted behind her. She felt his unspoken disapproval, loyalty bound in silence. He would not question her in front of them, but he didn't like this request. Neither did she. But orders from the high table of the Accord weren't to be ignored, not if Deathworlders were to be considered anything more than living weapons. Miran continued, her voice soft but insistent. "We know the history. We've studied the neurosuppression fields, the emotional dampening tech. We recognize it as an evolutionary necessity for survival on your world. But here on Zealer, we aim for a different kind of survival, one that doesn't require armor between hearts." Kira said nothing. Her armor bore the marks of 32 campaigns, 3 planetary wars, and 1 insurrection she had quelled with her own hands. On her world, survival didn't mean endurance, it meant dominion. She had killed her first creature when she was 7. It had taken her left eye and most of her shoulder. The mask had given her both back, improved, stronger, faster. And now they wanted it gone. She turned, slow and precise, and exited the room. The council would reconvene in 1 hour, time enough to decide whether she would comply or walk away from the fragile negotiations that could stop a war, or start one. The corridors were lined with green biolight, pulsing like veins through the station walls. Kira stepped into her quarters, sealing the door behind her. The moment the lock engaged, her posture changed. Not relaxed, but released, like a coiled beast allowed to stretch. She reached up, fingers hovering at the magnetic clasp beneath her ear. The mask knew her hesitation. Its systems offered calming stimuli, audio loops, pulse dampeners. She disabled them. With a sharp twist, the seal broke. A hiss of vapor, and then the mask lifted. Air rushed in like a slap. She staggered, catching herself on the edge of the console. The lights seemed too bright, the walls too close. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from fear, but from unrestrained chemical chaos. Her hands trembled. She hadn't removed the mask in 8 years. She looked into the mirror. Without the glowing lenses, her eyes were gray, almost colorless. Her face was lean, sharpened by the decades, marked with thin white scars that mapped her survival. She barely recognized herself. There was no softness there, just memory in motion. A knock. Arian entered without waiting. He had known her too long for protocol. His own mask hung from his belt, the scars around his temples still livid from his last unmasking. He said nothing at first, only watched her as she wiped sweat from her brow. "They're making a mistake," he said finally. She nodded. "Yes, you don't have to do it." She looked at him, and for a moment, the weight of everything hung in the silence between them. "If I don't," she said, "they'll never trust us. We'll remain what they always feared, creatures behind steel, beyond feeling. And if you do," Kira picked up the mask, holding it like a relic, "then they will see why we wore them in the first place." The hour passed like water through clenched fists. When she returned to the council chamber, the air itself felt tighter, as if the station knew what was coming. She stepped to the center of the room, wordless. Still, her fingers met the clasp again. They watched. The hiss was quieter this time. She removed the mask slowly, deliberately, like peeling back layers of history. Her eyes met theirs. No red glow, no distortion. Just raw, unfiltered humanity. And then the tide hit. Images, memories, screams. Her father, dying with his mask shattered. Her sister's breathless corpse in the acid marshes. The eyes of a child she had saved only to watch burn a week later in an orbital strike. She gasped, and the chamber spun. A hand reached for her, Miran's. Kira recoiled. "Don't," she growled, and in that sound was the echo of everything they had feared. Her vision flickered. Instinct screamed, danger. Threat. Strike first. Her body tensed, years of muscle memory igniting like fire in dry grass. And then, a breath. Kira forced herself to breathe. The storm began to pass. Not gone, but leashed. She looked at Miran again. The envoy's hand remained outstretched, open. There was terror in her eyes, but something else, too. Respect, perhaps. Or pity. Kira hated both. She looked down at the mask. It had protected her from pain, yes, but also from healing. "I will not do this again," she said, her voice hoarse. Miran nodded slowly. Once was enough. The council said little else. The session ended quietly, almost reverently, as if something sacred had been unearthed. Later, alone in the hangar bay, Kira stood with her mask in her hand, staring out into the star-pierced void. Her ship waited. The choice hung before her like a blade, suspended by thread. To return to her world, her command, her war, or remain in this fragile dance of diplomacy and restraint. Behind her, Arian approached. "They want a follow-up session," he said. She turned slowly. "Do they want me masked or unmasked?" They said, "Whatever you prefer." Kira let the silence stretch. Then, without another word, she put the mask back on, not as surrender, but as decision. The red glow returned, and with it purpose, but something beneath it had changed. Subtle, like a wire slightly frayed, still functioning but exposed. She walked toward the ship. The stars awaited, and so did the consequence. The silence in Kira's private chamber was not quiet. It was the kind of silence that came with pressure, as if the air itself anticipated what came next. Her mask lay on the table, inert, its inner mechanisms still warm from use. Across from her, Miran stood with a calm that masked her own tension. The room was secure, sterile, and shadowed, designed for vulnerability. Kira sat stiffly in the observation chair, a biometric monitor whispering its data into the comm stream. Her fingers curled slightly on the armrests, every instinct resisting what she was about to do. For all her battlefield courage, this felt like something else entirely. Not a challenge to survive, but to surrender. "You don't need to speak," Miran said gently. "Just be here. That's all we're asking." Kira didn't respond. Her jaw tightened, a flicker of emotion passing through eyes that were now too human. The neural inhibitors in her bloodstream had long since worn off. Without the mask, nothing filtered the raw electric flood of her thoughts. They had scheduled this as a trust-building exercise, an initiative the diplomats believed would pave the way for integration between Deathworlders and the rest of the Accord. What they didn't understand was that Deathworlders didn't fear sharing trust. They feared sharing themselves. Miran took a seat across from her, folding her hands on her lap. "You were just a child when you first put it on, weren't you?" Kira glanced at her. 6 years, 2 months, 3 days. The answer came reflexively, cataloged and archived like every vital fact her training had deemed essential. Yet saying it aloud disturbed her more than she'd expected. She had known no adolescence. There had been no rites of passage, only missions, drills, deaths, and increasingly heavier masks. The moment it activated, Kira continued, voice low, my world changed. The noise stopped. My thoughts organized. My fear contained. I could think clearly for the first time. Miran leaned forward slightly, and without it, Kira laughed, a single, bitter breath of sound. "I'm not thinking. I'm surviving." The room dimmed subtly, a programmed cue for relaxation. Kira's heartbeat rose instead. The flood started slowly, small, flickering memories flashing unbidden. Her mother's distant voice on a war-scorched plain, a brother's silhouette dragged into the darkness by something too fast to be seen. She blinked, and the images intensified. Her body clenched in response, jaw locking tight to trap the scream building beneath her ribs. A glass of water slid toward her. She didn't touch it. Miran's expression softened. Kira, you're doing more than any of us have a right to ask. But you need to know, we see your strength. Not just on the battlefield, but here. Now. You see nothing, Kira said, voice trembling under control. You see a body, a face. You think strength means breaking in front of you and choosing not to run. Isn't that exactly what it means? Kira stood abruptly. Her chair clattered back. No, strength is knowing you're not safe, even from yourself, and locking it down anyway. Strength is war within. This is a rupture. You asked me to open it, and now you watch to see if I bleed. Miran stood slowly, cautious. We're not watching you bleed, Kira. We're trying to help you stop. The chamber door hissed open before Kira could respond. Arian stepped in, but one glance at Kira's face halted him mid-step. His hand hovered close to the weapon he hadn't worn since landing, muscle memory betraying caution. Kira's skin was pale, but her eyes burned, not with rage, but something far more dangerous. Her shoulders trembled. Every breath was a fight. I told them this was too soon, Arian said without taking his eyes off her. She's unraveling. No, Kira snapped. I'm not. She turned away from both of them, gripping the table as if anchoring herself to the present. The pressure in her chest was rising. Familiar, terrible, like the moments before berserker states she had long since conquered through biotech and will. She had studied her own neurological collapse, knew its contours, and it was coming for her again. She felt the moment she lost control. It was not dramatic, just a shift like a change in wind direction before storm. Her vision narrowed. She could hear every heartbeat in the room. Her muscles flooded with stored energy, and in one blink, she was beside Miran. Arian shouted her name. Too late. Her hand was around Miran's throat. The envoy didn't scream, didn't struggle. She met Kira's eyes and said one word, calmly, gently, stop. And Kira did. Just before the break, just before the scream of instinct overrode everything else, she stopped. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. She released Miran and stepped back, horror overtaking her fury. Her hands trembled. Her knees threatened to buckle. But she did not fall. She simply stood there, shaking, broken open. I didn't want to, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. Miran touched her own throat gently, fingers brushing skin that was already reddening. You didn't. Kira turned to Arian, whose hand had finally dropped away from his belt. His face was pale, eyes wide, but there was no accusation there. Only fear. Not of her. For her. I told you, she said softly, her voice splintering. We were the mask because we have to, not because we want to. No one argued. Kira walked slowly to the wall where her armor lay sealed. She pressed her hand to the biometric panel. The mask clicked open with a hiss, glowing faintly as it awaited her command. She looked at it, then at them. I will finish this, she said, more to herself than anyone else. But after that, never again. She picked up the mask and turned it in her hands. Her face was still flushed. Her eyes rimmed red. There were tears there, not from pain, not even from sadness, but from a pressure that could no longer be contained. She stepped out of the room, alone. Her breath was still ragged. Her heart still pounded, but she didn't put the mask on. Not yet. Out in the corridor, the sounds of the station returned. Muffled voices, distant generators, the artificial heartbeat of interstellar civility. Kira walked among it all like a ghost, unarmored and unshielded. A passing technician did a double take at her bare face. A diplomat paused mid-step, unsure whether to greet or retreat. No one approached. Kira kept walking until she reached the observation deck. Glass domes spanning above her, stars in every direction. Her homeworld was visible, a pale blue-gray sphere wreathed in cloud and ruin. She pressed her forehead to the glass. For the first time since the unmasking, she let herself breathe. Not shallow, regulated, military breaths, but deep, ragged, unfiltered ones. And she realized something strange. She was still herself. No mask, no war, no death, and still, Kira. Behind her, the door slid open. Miran stepped in quietly. Her throat was marked. Her voice rasped slightly as she said, "The council wants to know what you plan to say in the final session." Kira didn't turn. "Tell them I'll speak." And the mask? There was a long silence. Then Kira turned around, eyes steady but unreadable. "I haven't decided." Miran nodded once and left without pushing further. The stars hung, silent witnesses to everything that had passed and what was still to come. Kira stood in the center of the great council chamber, light from the domed ceiling spilling over her like a judgment. Dozens of species watched her from staggered tears, their eyes inscrutable, their silence oppressive. The air was stale with the perfume of diplomacy and the sterility of political distance. She wore no armor. The mask hung at her hip, lifeless and inert, a symbol now rather than a shield. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low but firm. "You asked to see us without our masks," she said, "to witness the face beneath the myth. But what you truly wanted was proof that we were still human." No one interrupted. Even those who had dismissed her kind as violent relics listened now. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You misunderstand our masks. They're not weapons. They are walls, and sometimes prisons. But they're also the only reason many of us survived long enough to stand here." Kira glanced at the delegation from the Tira sector, those who had petitioned the Accord to expel Deathworlders from its protective treaties. Their envoy, a narrow-eyed being of translucent skin and coiling sensory fronds, stared without emotion. "You think we're unstable," she said, addressing them directly now. "You fear that behind the armor lies a rage too vast to contain, that if we were to truly feel, the galaxy would suffer." Her fingers tightened at her sides. "You're not wrong." A murmur rippled through the chamber. She raised her hand, silencing it. "I don't stand here to deny what we are. Deathworlders are violent. We evolved in a crucible of fire and terror. We learned to kill before we learned to speak. But that is not the whole story. We also learned to protect, to endure, to love fiercely." Kira's gaze swept across the chamber, finding Miran near the rear, seated beside Arian. Both watched her with expressions too tangled to parse. Part pride, part dread, part something else. "We were the mask because without it, the weight of memory crushes us. The things we've seen, the things we've done. We are not like you. You do not dream of ash." She took a breath, sharp and unsteady, then continued. "But I removed mine. You asked for the unfiltered truth. I gave it to you, and you saw what I was. Terrifying, yes. Uncontained. But I didn't lose myself. I came back." There was a long pause. Some looked away. Others stared with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Kira's voice dropped, heavy with something like pain. "The danger isn't that we're monsters hiding behind metal. The danger is that you might convince us to believe that's all we are." For a moment, the silence held. Then the Tyrian envoy stirred. Its voice, translated by the interface implant humming in Kira's ear, was cold and precise. "And if your kind were to fracture again, if the mask fails and the fury returns, what then?" Kira stepped closer. "Then we face it, together." The envoy tilted its head. "Together? Even if that fury destroys us?" "Especially then," Kira said, "because the alternative is isolation. And isolation is what forged the monsters you fear." There was nothing left to say. She stepped back and took her seat beside Miran, the mask still untouched at her side. The debate began, as it always did, with procedural formality. Voices rose and fell in the ceremonial rhythms of galactic politics. Yet something had shifted. The room was no longer speaking about Deathworlders. It was speaking to them. Kira leaned back, exhausted but present. Miran didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. She simply sat with her. After an hour, the final vote was called. Admission to full accord status. The tally began sector by sector, voice by voice. 1 against, 3 abstentions, dozens in favor. Kira didn't react, even as the final count lit up in green across the chamber ceiling. Cheers erupted from some quadrants. In others, there was stony silence. But it didn't matter. The Deathworlders had been accepted, not just as a military contingency, not as mercenaries, but as equals. Her hands trembled in her lap. Kira, Miran said quietly, "It's over." Kira looked at her. "No," she said. "It's just beginning." Outside the chamber, the atmosphere was electric. Cameras hovered, eager to capture the moment. Delegates approached, some offering words of welcome, others more hesitant, as if proximity might provoke violence. Kira moved through them like a shadow, acknowledging some, passing by others. She paused at a balcony overlooking the core of the city station. The skyline shimmered with neon and starlight. From this height, the galaxy felt vast and full of possibility. Footsteps approached. "Arian, I was wrong," he said simply. Kira didn't respond. "I thought taking off the mask would break you. I thought we'd lose you." Kira turned slightly, enough to meet his eyes. "You weren't wrong. It did break me, but I chose to rebuild." Arian exhaled, a sound halfway between awe and regret. "You know this isn't the end, right? There will be pushback, subterfuge, hostility." Kira nodded. "There always is. But now we're not facing it alone." Below them, the city buzzed with movement. Life, real and unvarnished, went on. And then Kira did something unexpected. She lifted the mask in her hand, studied it one last time, and let it drop. It hit the balcony floor with a dull clang. Not shattered, not destroyed, just left behind. Arian didn't ask her why. He didn't need to, because in that moment, Kira wasn't just a Deathworlder without a mask. She was the proof that survival could mean more than endurance. It could mean transformation.